Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'm assuming people are calling in from around the world. Thank you for joining us. I am Sarah Arth, the Vice President of Education for Bio. Thank you everyone for joining, and really thank you for being willing to participate and share your expertise as we work to put the Bio Digital Convention on during these unprecedented times. We really appreciate your support and working with the team here to put this event on. I'm happy to be here today to kick this off, really kick it off to the main guests. But I do want to take a moment to thank our partners who came to us to collaborate to put on this webinar that we think is very important at this time. So thank you to W2O Group, our presenters and really partners in putting the content together, and for the California Life Sciences Association in supporting the work and collaborating with us to put this content on. It is very much my honor to introduce James Greenwood, CEO of Bio, or Jim Greenwood, as I should say. I never call you James. He's going to give a few remarks to open it up, and then we're going to get into the do's and don'ts of what to do during a digital presentation. So, all you, Jim.
Thank you, Sarah. I am Jim Greenwood. I am the President and CEO of Bio. Thanks for joining the webinar. And I want to thank you all for participating as speakers on the Bio Digital program and for your willingness to share your experience in this really obviously unprecedented time in our history. I'm happy to be here to introduce the webinar. The Bio Digital Convention will take place in just a few short weeks, and we promise not to disappoint. The event will offer over 100 education sessions, of which you are all involved, addressing the most critical issues of the day. Thousands of critical partnering meetings will take place, and attendees will have access to the most influential executives in the biotech industry, namely you. Thousands of people from over 50 countries are registered to attend already and currently scheduling partnering meetings. Now, I know we've all been participating and presenting at online meetings, and I've learned a lot. We've all learned a lot over the past few months. But I still think we could all learn a few pointers from the experts, like next time I'll wear a bow tie like Mike. It is my honor to introduce the experts, and they are today's speakers: Mike Huckman, Global Practice Leader and Executive Communications at W2O Group, and Barbara Pinto, who's the Practice Leader and Executive Communications at W2O Group. They both bring extensive experience in front of the camera, and we're glad that they are here today to share their expertise. So thank you, Mike and Barbara, and I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim, and hello, everybody. First of all, a round of applause for Jim Greenwood's leadership and dedication to Bio over all these years. And we wish you, Jim, all of us, wish you Godspeed in your next chapter. You are most welcome. Thank you also, first of all, to Bio for hosting this event today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And another shout out to the California Life Sciences Association for really helping to make this event happen. I am Mike Huckman, and on behalf of Barbara Pinto and myself, it is a real pleasure to be here with everybody virtually today. We are the leaders of the executive communications practice at W2O. And for those of you who are not familiar with our agency, it is a data and analytics driven public relations, investor relations, and marketing communications firm that is exclusively focused on the life sciences and the healthcare sectors. So my introduction to the life sciences was as CNBC's first ever biopharmaceuticals reporter from 2000 to 2010. And since then, I've been doing this type of coaching work that we're going to be doing together today. I'm now going to turn it over to my teammate, Barbara Pinto, whose name some of you might be familiar with if you happen to have watched World News Tonight with Peter Jennings or with Diane Sawyer. And in Barbara's role as an ABC News reporter, she got to fly not once, but twice straight into the eye of a Cat 5 with the government's hurricane hunters. Barbara says it was very scary and she doesn't recommend it. Lately though, she's been refreshing her haircutting skills while in quarantine on her one and only client who just happens to be her husband. And he tells me it's very scary And he wouldn't recommend it. Barbara, over to you.
And just for the record, all ears intact, no blood was shed. Thank you, Mike. Like Mike, I am a recovering journalist. I am so happy to be here today. I worked alongside Mike at CNBC, then moved on to ABC News and then PBS before joining executive coaching practice. And I marvel at all of the very important work you do. Mike has told you a bit about me, and now it's my turn to return the favor. Something you might not know about Mike: he is a rabid USC Trojans fan, and he is almost equally as enthusiastic about bow ties. And today he's wearing both allegiances around his collar. We introduce each other this way just to get you thinking a bit about creativity, the differentiators that can catch and keep your audience's attention, something that sets you apart. So if you're moderating, introducing your panelists, do it not just with the information you'd find on a boilerplate CV, but with something people may not know about your panelists, anything from unusual hobbies to what they learned last week in quarantine, even if it is that they should never cut their spouse's hair at home. But take a look at our agenda today and what we're going to cover. In our time together, our goals are to help you all stand out, to shine in a sea of sameness, to think not just outside the box, but outside this particular box. We are all craving the dynamism of face-to-face human interaction. And unfortunately, this is the world we're going to live in for a while. So the goal is to make this 2D digital landscape more captivating, more dynamic, and more human.
And we're going to help you achieve those goals that Barbara just laid out by walking you through a number of what we see as best practices and also watchouts, things not to do when it comes to doing digital or virtual presenting well, whether you're doing a speech, whether you're moderating a panel, whether you're appearing on a panel, it doesn't matter. We'll cover all the bases. And on our journey, we will take it, excuse me, in 3 parts. First, focusing on style, then talking about the tech, and third, addressing the substance before we open it up to your questions, and then finally offering our closing thoughts before we send you all on your way. Now, if you want to ask one or both of us a question, we ask that you please submit your question at any time, starting now, during the presentation, in the Q&A column, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as we possibly can that we have time for. We request that in addition to providing your name, if you don't mind, it would also be helpful for us if you wouldn't share your affiliation as well, and we thank you in advance for that.
Let's begin with our new virtual reality. This is the communication landscape we'll be living in and operating in for a while. We'll all be going screen to screen. Now, there are some potential advantages here, the first of which is it's a really easy commute, but there are also some potential disadvantages. It's a challenge to stand out when you're in a tiny little box, and you're also inviting a lot of people, both colleagues and perfect strangers, into your home, and you're in theirs. And not to mention the distractions, the kids, the dogs, the spouses, the partners, the construction projects, one of which just started at my building yesterday. So if you hear hammers, drills, saws pounding, it's coming from this little box. Everything can take away from how we focus our attention. Case in point, seconds count. Microsoft did a study in the year 2000 and found the average attention span in America is about 12 seconds. They repeated the study in 2015. This is after we've all gotten our devices and are regularly participating in what we like to call the iPhone prayer, constantly hunched over our devices, checking messages. They found in 2015 that the average attention span in humans had shrunk to 8 seconds. I have no idea how they know this, but they say that a goldfish's attention span that allows it to swim around a little bowl and say, wow, that's a great plastic castle, is only 9 seconds. So our attention span is officially shorter than a goldfish. And while that is deeply pathetic, it's also greatly instructive. We have a short window to grab people's attention and keep it, Otherwise, they're off to something else. Particularly true now when we have so many potential distractions at home, and also in a remote setting, people are not physically in the room with us. They don't have to stay.
And I'll put out this hypothesis as well. If Microsoft were to do this study again, right now in the current environment, I'm going to hypothesize that that 8 seconds likely becomes 7 or 6. Now, everyone, let's start with how you should virtually show up. And it shouldn't be like this, nor should it be like this.
Or like this, when all of the light is behind you and you look like you are coming to us from the heavens.
Here are more examples of what good looks like and what bad looks like. These are tweets from Room Rater, R-A-T-E-R, not R-A-I-D-E-R, Room Rater, which has been attracting quite a following over the past couple of months on Twitter. For the uninitiated, this is a super entertaining Twitter account that rates people's settings and their shots on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the best, as these people appear on shows, maybe when they're testifying on Capitol Hill, while broadcasting from their homes. The one in the center you might all probably recognize from just a few days ago. We think Room Rater, though, was being super generous with the 10 out of 10 that they gave to Dr. Anthony Fauci's room. Now, while he definitely would get a 10 in our book for being his infectious disease expertise, no question about that, Barbara and I think that his camera skills leave a lot to be desired. He had positioned the camera way too high. And if you were watching any part of his testimony, you probably saw the top of his head for most of it. And then he spent way too much time looking down at his desk or off to the side and not straight into the camera. And now, moving to the image on the lower left of this slide, this gentleman and many others, men and women like him, who have similar setups, are typically getting an extremely low rating from Room Rater because they kind of look like hostage videos.
Another bad score for the gentleman in the guitar, recording artist Brian Adams in the top right corner, who looks like he just may have gotten either locked in a closet or trapped in the plywood department of Home Depot. So think about your background. What do the top rated rooms have in common? We'll take a look, let's say, for example, the woman on the top left in the red and the woman bottom center in the green. Their faces are nicely lit, unlike the way I was sitting before. The light source is in front of them, so their face is the brightest part of the shot. They both have some depth of field behind them. They're not backed up against the wall, almost like a police lineup. And they have plants or unimposing art behind them. Nothing too distracting. Nothing that makes you think, what is that? Or what is she wearing? Which takes us to the next point. Be mindful of attire and comportment. What is she wearing? What am I wearing? The thing that you probably should not wear, stripes. And if you can see the way this is moving, this is called the moire effect. And it happens with small patterns or prints or stripes, and it can be very distracting. So we would encourage you not to wear this. Think solid colors when you appear on camera, and a color that sets you apart from your background so that you pop in the screen. Also think about comportment, your body language. Sit up straight. Many of us have office chairs that tend to swivel or rock, and people can self-soothe without even knowing it and end up kind of looking like they're lulling themselves to sleep. Just be mindful of that. If you have a chair that swivels or rocks, disable that function. Also, you may be tempted to cross your legs, and that may be how you're comfortable sitting, but that can skew your neck at an odd angle. Best practices are to sit with your knees facing the computer, feet flat on the floor, and the camera at eye level.
Barbara is seated for today's presentation. I, however, am standing in my home office because I personally find that it helps me a lot with my energy level when I'm presenting. So if you don't have a laptop stand at home, you can jerry-rig a makeshift podium like I did. So my laptop is actually standing somewhat precariously on a tall stack of the Harry Potter series, as well as the thick physician's desk reference and the even thicker Essential Guide to Prescription Drugs 2005 edition. Our experience in all seriousness though, has shown that when presenters, most, are on their feet, it increases energy level and it really enhances your delivery.
Another plus that may seem basic, but it's really tough to kind of conjure up sometimes in this setting is to smile. Think about the people that are beyond your screen. It's difficult to talk to an inanimate object and expend warmth, but I like to keep this on my computer as a reminder to smile and that there are other people out there. It's very high tech, but I put this little Post-it note right by the camera so I know where to look, and that warmth conveys through the screen.
And use your voice as your instrument. So you may have noticed that Barbara and I have been doing this throughout the presentation thus far, and that is using inflection, using verbal emphasis to command and keep people's attention.
Pace and tone are really important, especially in a remote setting where people may have a spotty connection or miss visual cues. It's really important not to race. People may have not so great connections. You want to make sure that they can hear and process everything. Also, there is power in something that is a little counterintuitive, the pause. When you pause, you put your listeners to work. They can catch up with you. If I say the most important thing to remember is, and I pause, your brain naturally says, what? What is it? So a well-placed pause can be a break between subjects. It can be used to drive a point home or add drama and some interest.
Let's move from the do's to the don'ts when it comes to style. Remember, everyone, that you're going to be on camera for the entire time. You are putting on a show. This is a performance. That's how you should think about it. I once saw a panelist, a physician, put his head in his hands while sitting on the dais at a table during a panel discussion. So in this venue, your image is being watched much more closely than when you're on a stage, let's say in a large auditorium or in a convention center breakout room. And knowing the uber close-up nature of this digital medium, Barbara and I encourage you to use facial and hand gestures as well. But don't go crazy to the point where you're flailing about and you become a total distraction, either with your hand gestures or perhaps even by any attention-grabbing jewelry or accessories that you might have on, like bangles and baubles and bracelets that can jingle jangle when your hands hit the surface.
Also, another don't, and this is pretty much a universal don't that Mike and I would encourage you not to do, don't ramble. In this setting, attention spans are particularly short, and the more you say, the more you can stray from the headlines you want your audience to remember. So whether you're a presenter, a moderator, a panelist, lead with the good stuff. Lead with your headline, boil it down. Too much excess can drown your audience in information and dilute your main points. Never mind that droning on can be the equivalent of human ambient. And it's really tough to get that feedback from an audience remotely. In a room, you can see the heads nodding in an iPhone prayer, or worse yet, nodding off, heaven forbid. So to capture and hold attention, the goal is to be what we like to call infotaining, presenting important information in a somewhat entertaining way to keep viewers and listeners alert and engaged. And that could be doing something different, doing something unexpected.
And don't be human ambient. And this is how you can avoid being human ambient and being more captivating as we move to the next slide. Now, we might look a little silly in the big picture that's on the right, but I have to tell you, we did get much better reviews for this panel than the Game of Thrones series finale episode did, We absolutely slayed. So that is me and some very game colleagues at a W2O event. I'm on the far left, as you might guess, Jon Snow. Jon Snow, for those of you who are hashtag GOT fans, may know nothing, but I know that this is an excellent way to help captivate your audience. On the upper left, that's me at a South by Southwest fireside chat with somebody many of you may recognize, Katrine Bosley, who in our pre-meeting ahead of this chat had told me that she does something every morning that she calls the toothbrush test. It's when she thinks about her upcoming workday. So I put a new clean toothbrush into my breast pocket of my jacket, and I pulled it out toward the end of the fireside chat session, and I asked her to explain for everybody in the audience what in the heck is the toothbrush test. Then at a Mass Bio event a few years ago, in the lower left picture on this slide, I had another prop up my sleeve when conducting a fireside chat with someone else some of you might recognize, Dr. Tony Coles. In this case, I pulled a wand out of my suit breast pocket, and this time I asked Dr. Coles that if he were able to wave that, let's say it was a magic wand, what would he change in biotech, in the life sciences? To be absolutely clear, you do not have to put on a costume or a wig. You don't have to bring a toothbrush. You don't have to bring a wand or some other prop for that matter. And please don't everyone go off and start to do stuff like this. But the bottom line is you do need to think creatively, please. For example, let's say you're doing a panel that's about breast cancer. Maybe everyone you have put on a little pink. Or if you're talking about cardiovascular disease, maybe everybody wears red that day. Just to give you a couple examples.
Now, what are the other important pillars of our new world order? We know we're only as good as the technology, and it helps immensely. In fact, it's mandatory to check the tech. We are in this virtual landscape. We're at the mercy of technology, not just our technology, but the technology in the household and the workspaces of every single person on your panel and everyone listening to anything that you put out virtually. So here are some best and worst practices. First, the worst. Don't go coronaviral. This TV reporter accidentally delivered a weather report with Facebook's mystery mask filter turned on. So
Poor
please,
guy.
turn off or disable anything that can alter your appearance. That goes for Snapchat filters, mystery masks. Also close every other application on your computer, silence email notifications and other bells and whistles, Slack, Messenger, any of that. And then do a background check. We talked a bit about backgrounds when we looked at those room rater slides. But it's really important to check your background. I would suggest once you figure out where you want to sit and be, use your phone, take a selfie, show it to someone in your family, a friend, a colleague to say, does this look okay to you? You want to look for anything that could potentially be distracting. If your audience is thinking, is that a blanket on the couch or a dog? They're going to be looking at the blanket or the dog the entire presentation. Or if they're trying to read the titles of the books behind you on your bookshelf, they won't pay attention to any of the important things you have to say.
Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to tech is make sure you can be heard. Channel your inner air traffic controller or airline pilot and wear a very directional headset like the one that I'm wearing. You could wear wired earbuds like Barbara is wearing, or do what most people are doing these days, and that's wear AirPods. And we've even had clients who wear one at a time in case you're concerned over the course of your discussion or your presentation that they might run out of juice. Keep one on charge, and then when the other one seems to be fading, just switch them off. So it's always good to have a plan B because you're always at the mercy of the technology. In addition, if you're in a room with a lot of hard surfaces, you can sound like you're deep in a well. We've all seen it and heard it over the last couple of months on television especially. So a solution for you for that is to either find another location in your house or pile up a bunch of pillows, blankets, quilts, out of camera range, of course, please, because they make good makeshift sound baffles. And on top of all that, be selfish. You never thought somebody would counsel you to be selfish, but in this case, we want you to do that because we want you to hog the Wi-Fi at your house. If, for example, you don't have a ton of bandwidth, it seems to be spotty at times, keep everyone in the house off of their streaming video apps while you're recording your presentation or your session to avoid that dreaded freeze frame or your audio suddenly sounding super garbled, kind of like Charlie Brown's teacher underwater. On the don'ts, don't get too fancy with the tech. Keep it simple. I'm sure you've heard that before. I'm going to repeat it. Keep it simple. You may have noticed already that Barbara and I don't have any animations. There are no reveals. There are no builds. There are no videos. We love those things. We come from a visual medium. We love bells and whistles. We love high production value. It makes us more infotaining. But that's deliberate that we've left them out because we know from our television careers that you are always at the mercy of the technology. Nothing ruins a good presentation, a good session, more than when Murphy's Law decides to show up. So please, if you can avoid it, don't take that risk. And please don't do this. You might have a great jawline and you might think you have a beautiful profile, but don't get cheeky like I just did. We've seen so many people looking off camera, looking at their computer monitor, looking at some other device, who knows what. If you were not virtual, if you were not doing this digitally, and you were in the room with the bio audience, you would not turn your face away from them when you're talking to them. So keep your gaze straight ahead. And building off of that, please don't tempt yourself with any distractions. In addition to shutting down the apps and things like that, please, no emailing, no texting, or looking down at your device during your session.
Another don't race. Many of us get nervous making presentations. We want it to be over. It's a temptation to kind of speed through. But now more than ever, it is more important that you take it slower. We are all at the mercy of the tech. We are at the mercy of the tech of everyone on the receiving end. Keep that in mind. If you're using slides, keep each of them up for a minute, maybe two, so that even folks with the slowest signal can keep up and hear and see all that you're presenting.
Now that we've talked about how you show up, let's turn our attention to how you show out with strong, compelling content. Here are the do's.
To start strong. We talked about that short attention span earlier on, and you do only have a few seconds to capture and captivate your audience. So you want to do that off the top. How do you do that? Ask a provocative question. Make a provocative statement. Tell people something they don't know. Use a prop or tell a story. People don't remember facts, but they do remember stories. The things that make them feel and hear and taste and see. To steal a line from Hamilton, stories take you into the room where it all happens. They marry facts to emotions. The most powerful words in the English language are for example. You want to show someone something they can relate to and tell a story. For example, I may tell you it's 85 degrees, and you may not remember that, but I might say, I made a huge mistake this morning. I put on a long sleeve silk shirt. I got out into that humidity and it stuck to me like I was wearing a hefty bag. You can almost feel the sweat on your skin when someone tells you that story. So you may not remember 85 degrees, but you remember that feeling. Stories marry a fact to a feeling and make them more memorable.
And I'll put a button on that with emphasis, deliberate, short stories. Yes. Make sure your stories are short and succinct. On top of that, consider divulging something new, something people may not know, something they may not be aware of. an important fact that could be about yourself, it could be about your organization, about your company, about your scientific approach, about your discovery, you name it. For example, to take Barbara's advice just a moment ago, let's say I were on a panel at BIO that happens to deal with COVID-19. If it were to fit into the discussion, I might at some point insert in the second half of March, after I got home here in North Carolina from a 2-week-long business trip in Manhattan, that I was experiencing what I thought were really severe chest pains. And of course, I was thinking the worst. But I came to realize it's that common ailment that so many of us have experienced over the last couple of months, known as anxiety.
In addition to those stories, it's important to know your role, know your bullseye, know the target you're looking to hit in any setting. When you speak publicly, whether it's on a panel or whether it's in a presentation, you want to educate, inspire, inform. The presenter's role is to impart important information, the moderator to guide an interesting, entertaining discussion, ask questions that let your panelists shine, not to answer your own question or eat the clock with long soliloquies. We say the conductor shouldn't play the violin. So go in knowing your role.
And now to the don'ts.
The first don't is don't read. If you read the slides verbatim, your audience stops paying attention. It can kill your charisma. It's okay to have bullets or notes to read along to, but make eye contact with your lens and your audience. When it comes to slides, think like a sportscaster. The play-by-play is something you could turn down the sound on the TV and see for yourself. So that's equivalent to reading the slides verbatim, but be the color guy. Be the person who tells the story behind the story. Explain the why, the relevance of what is on the slide, as opposed to reading it verbatim.
Or another way to think about the why is the so what. Don't just deliver the what, but make sure you're communicating the so what. Why should the audience care? What makes this special or different? And don't use too many or overcrowded slides for those of you who are putting together slide presentations. One of our biggest pet peeves is when a presenter says, so this is a really busy slide. We've all heard it. If it's busy, for gosh sakes, unbusy it. Clean up the slide. We don't care if it means that it causes you to have 2 more slides or 3 more slides. At least they'll be comprehensible and digestible by your audience. And while we want discussions to be dynamic and to be thought-provoking and energetic, please don't hog all of the airtime where one panelist piles on top of another panelist's answer, and then the other panelist comes in, and then the first panelist comes back in for another build, and your audience is going to become extremely frustrated and probably start to fall asleep or leave the session. If there have already been 2 or 3 builds on an answer, let's say, wait until later if it's something you just have to say. And you could do it this way. And I want to come back to a statement that Barbara made just a few minutes ago, because I actually have a different point of view and approach when it comes to X, Y, and Z. And fourth, and this is really important, everyone, don't end, and that's not a typo on the slide, don't end with what we call a poofed. We counseled you to start strong. We are also counseling you to finish strong. You don't want to stop captivating your audience just because you're almost out of time, or maybe out of time. Another pet peeve is when moderators say, all right, so it looks like we're just about out of time. So thanks everyone for your attention, and thanks for all your great questions, and thanks to our panelists, and have a great rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the biodigital program. Please put thought into how you finish. So coming back to my penchant for props, you could go on Amazon and buy a crystal ball as a moderator. And at the end of the discussion, or toward the end of the discussion, you hold the crystal ball up in front of everybody and you say, well, guess what, everybody? I brought my crystal ball today. And so panelists, I'd like you to gaze into my crystal ball and tell us what the future of X looks like at this juncture in time.
It's important to remember that you are essentially curating an experience for your audience in the same way Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese or any film director does, on a much, much smaller scale though, and on a much smaller budget. So think about your favorite movie. Think about how you felt leaving the theater. How do you want your audience to feel when they leave your theater? Inspired, educated, empowered, all of the above. And then what are the stories and the visuals you can use to accomplish that?
We are not at the end yet, so we're not going to end with a poof, of course, but now we would like to answer your questions. If you want to submit one, please use the Q&A tab. And in addition to your name, please, if you don't mind, let us know your affiliation as well. So Sarah, please fire away.
Sure. So the first question we have is, do we have to wear bow ties?
Yes, the Huckman rule of bow tie wearing. The answer is yes, an emphatic yes. In all seriousness, we are coaching our clients these days who are moderating panels, delivering speeches, going on CNBC, going on the Today Show, going on the evening news, going on the Sunday morning talk shows. We're actually counseling them to be very thoughtful about their sartorial choices. So for example, we think that there's much more grace and audiences are more forgiving and accepting of slightly more casual attire. That said, if you feel comfortable in a business suit, if you feel comfortable in a bow tie or a straight tie or what have you, then by all means wear it. But there's no sin committed if you want to go in with an open collared shirt, with a nice crisp polo shirt, and maybe a half zip sweater over it. I'll leave it to Barbara to maybe talk about lady apparel choices, not including, or maybe including bow ties. Why not?
If bow ties are your thing, I always think they look great. But yeah, just keep in mind that you want to make sure that you're in something you feel comfortable in, but you also want to make sure that it is a solid color, that it's not sheer, you can't see through it. You just want to make sure that you're in something that you feel comfortable with and looks professional. It can look a little more relaxed these days because we all are operating from home.
Sarah?
Great. One other question about this webinar and others is, or the recorded digital information is, are we allowed to screenshot and tweet the screenshots of the presenters? So I'll let you answer about this particular webinar, and then maybe I can talk a little bit more about the biodigital.
Sure. As long as you didn't put a Snapchat filter over our heads, I don't think we'd have an issue with that. We'll leave it to your discretion. And I don't know, Barbara, whether you have a test, maybe a question to ask before putting something on social media from this presentation.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly fine if it's okay with the other folks.
From Bio's perspective, we typically welcome it, and my only recommendation around when we get to the actual recordings for the speakers for Bio Digital is just to ask your fellow presenters if they're comfortable. It's almost the version of a picture of people on stage, which usually happens a lot. So
that's good to know. And if you want to tag us, my Twitter handle is my name, so @Mike Huckman, Huckman, and Barbara.
Yes, same. Barb Pinto.
And the next question is what is your view on a virtual background?
That is a really interesting question. And just in the interest of Murphy's Law, we usually advise against using them because we've seen things go terribly wrong with them. We had a client who was going to use one, and they tried it out for us just to see how it would look. And for some reason, it started morphing across the person's face, and they look like a scene out of the movie The Matrix. So there is a potential for things to go a little sideways there. So we tend to recommend against. Also, I think we saw in the testimony before Congress, Dr. Hahn used a virtual background, and it looked like he was broadcasting from heaven. So you just want to be mindful that things can go wrong, or just send an odd image.
Yeah, and that image, by the way, of Dr. Han got tweeted out on social media. So he went, we don't mean this term to be flip, but he went a little bit coronaviral. And another recent example I give you is that I've seen people get too cutesy clever with it. So I was recently attending virtually a biotech industry symposium, and one of the prominent guest speakers decided to put that I think it was the Oval Office White House photo of Trump and Obama behind them. And so the whole time that this person was speaking, you were just completely focused on the inappropriate virtual background choice that he had, and how goofy this person looked sitting in between the two of them. So I think the answer is no.
Great. I think that's helpful, and that answers the question a little bit about some props coming up in the background. So thank you for that. The next question I have is, what is your thought on poll questions and using other Zoom audience engagement tools? I'll answer it from the perspective of biodigital and then turn it to the experts to talk more generally. I do just want to remind everyone that the content will be pre-recorded, so the polls don't really apply in the context of biodigital, but obviously we have some other engagement tools. And then I don't know if Mike and Barbara have just general polling advice when we're going digital or on webinars.
I can go first, Barbara. I think it gets back to our advice in the upfront presentation about keeping it simple. And unless you've got a ridiculously solid platform and software to use, my recommendation would be against it. I just think that it's too risky, it's too clunky. There's too much Murphy's Law stuff that could get involved, the instruction that might be required on how to tell people to vote. I just think it's fraught with a fair amount of risk. Barbara?
Agreed.
Great.
Sarah?
Very helpful. The next question is, how do you feel about using headphones? What kind? I kind of think using the larger set makes me look a little bit like a gamer or an NFL commentator. And Kim, I have had the same feeling myself, but I will ask Mike and Barbara to talk a little bit about that as well. I know we touched on that a little about several different kinds, maybe just to reiterate that.
Sure. So I have no issues with looking like an NFL commentator or an air traffic controller. I invested in this just within the last couple of months. So if you're curious what brand it is, it's Sennheiser. Sennheiser, Sennheiser. You might guess it is a German company. It is a microphone brand that Barbara and I are very familiar with because Sennheiser mics are used a lot in the broadcast news business. So I personally like this because the earpieces are relatively small. They're not the big over-ear things that could make you look like a gamer or an NFL commentator. And I like the directional nature of the microphone. So, but I also think AirPods work well too. Barbara?
Yeah, I'm a fan of this little ear headset by Bose. And just because the AirPods don't necessarily stay in my ears, they fall out, and this just feels more secure to me, and the mic falls into the right place so I can get good sound. But yeah, it's whatever you're comfortable with. I think we've seen all versions. The thing that I think is just most egregious is people who don't have a mic close to their face and are in a room with a high ceiling or a lot of hard surfaces that sound really echoey or tinny, or have to lean way into the computer to get their voice heard.
And that's not a good look, by the way.
A couple of more questions here. One is, will a copy of the webinar be available? And yes, it will be. We will be sending it out to all speakers for the event, as well as posting it on our respective websites. So we will make sure everyone gets a copy of this great content. Another question, a little bit maybe more generalized, is any additional moderator tips?
Sure. I think in terms of being a moderator, people think that the best and most important skill for a moderator is to have really good questions. And that's kind of the minor function of the role. I think great moderators are great listeners. They may have a list of questions, but they listen really carefully to find out what's going on in the conversation and how they can play off of that and ask really interesting questions. I always think about good panel discussions like a cocktail party minus the cocktails. There is some, really great information shared. There may be a little vigorous back and forth, mixing it up, those dissenting opinions. So getting at that early. And then also, I think as a moderator, another general rule is never let panelists introduce themselves, because you may get one panelist who says, Joe Smith, ABC Company, and the next panelist says, Mary Jones, I went to grade school in England, and then I knew from the start I wanted to go into this industry, and then you've lost your audience and about 20 minutes as well.
And in 2002, I decided to go work in a lab, and I stayed there until 2008 when I was asked to join, right?
Yeah, it become an issue. So make sure that you find the 2 or 3 really interesting nuggets about the person to introduce them, and including some of those creative personal ideas to really get the panel kicked off.
Another tip is not only not going around the horn for introductions, but we also don't care for the style where moderators begin by just going around the horn with the stereotypical opening statements, because to Barbara's point, one panelist's opening statement is appropriately a minute. The next one goes on for 8 minutes. The one after that goes on for 12 minutes. And at this point, you've lost your entire audience. So our approach is to start with a thought starter, start with a thought-provoking question, a provocative question, throw a verbal grenade out there, throw out something new, move the conversation forward. So there is a lot of responsibility and onus on being a good, successful, dynamic panel moderator.
Another thing to remember too is that the human brain really tires easily of repetition. So if you go panelist A, panelist B, panelist C, panelist A, panelist B, panelist C, people will lose interest. Not every panelist has to answer every question. So find out what the kind of points are that people really feel strongly about, and then engineer your discussion to really play at those strengths in the panel.
No more builds. We're not going to commit the sin that we just told you not to commit. So we're done. Sarah, next question, please, if there is one.
Wonderful. Yep, there's a few more. What's the best process to, during virtual meetings, not tend to talk over the other panelists? Everyone seems to start talking at the same time, and are there any tips to avoid that?
And it's even more challenging in this world. So while we're strong advocates of dynamic discussions, we want panelists to mix it up. We want disagreement on a good panel when you've structured the panel with the right guests in the right way, but it can become a bit unwieldy in this format. So I would recommend taking care of that on your pre-call, and please, a pre-call should be mandatory for all participants on your panel, and talk about what the choreography will be. If you do want to chime in, please wait until you're sure the other panelist is done, or wait for my direction as a moderator to say, oh, John, it sounds like, I could tell you've been trying to chime in here. So what's your thinking about that? So there's a couple of different ways you can approach it, but this should be agreed upon on the pre-call, the planning call. Barbara?
Yeah, there is, I think you can tell when people are ready to speak, and it's up to the moderator to really, especially in this format, just keep an eye on those verbal cues. You can also call people out by name and say, John, I know you've got something to say on this. Go right ahead, jump in.
Great. One more question here. Any tips on keeping a fireside chat interesting? There's concern about losing momentum with just having 2 speakers, a moderator and an interviewee.
Yes. The power of storytelling, I think, is first and foremost in a fireside chat. And a lot of that should be covered in the pre-call with the person. I think just finding out what the inflection points are. What are the most interesting stories this person can be telling? What are those lessons? What are the, just culling all of the gold and then figuring out how to present that. So whenever someone tells a compelling story and takes you into the room, it's enrapturing. Even if it is just a one-on-one discussion, you want to listen to those stories. So finding out what they are and getting at them in the conversation. Anything else, Mike?
Yeah. And how do you do that? There's at least a couple of different ways that you can do that. One, you could do your own research. Poke around the World Wide Web and see what comes up, and maybe you can find something. I saw that in 2004, you were on the rugby team at Princeton. Is that true? What, and you were quite the star. I saw blah, 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 whatever it is. Or this happens on the pre-call. You want to, getting back to what we talked about in the upfront presentation, try to uncover new ground, things that people don't know about the person, whether it's the toothbrush test or what have you. And then getting back to Barbara's point about how to be a good moderator, it's about listening. So listening to what the fireside chat interviewee is saying and say, hold up a sec. That's the first time I've heard you say that. Can you dig deeper into that? Can you give us more details around what actually happened? Because I think there could be a lot of really key learnings in that experience that you had for our audience. So don't just have your agreed upon set of questions, the mile markers that you want to hit during the discussion. You can do those, but also keep listening and keep peppering in along the way with questions. And then think about ways like with what I did, whether it was pulling out the toothbrush, whether it was pulling out the magic wand, or for example, in another fireside chat that I did with Tony Coles, he wanted, at the time, he was watching Chris Matthews' show on MSNBC, and he loved the way Chris ended his show by always saying, tell us something we don't know. And he's like, Mike, I want you to end the fireside chat with that question. And I didn't ask him what he was going to say. I didn't ask him. And so because I wanted an element of surprise too for me as the fireside chat host. And so that's how we finished. Tony, before we go, tell us something we don't know. Sarah?
Great. There's no more questions. There's lots of thankses, and just a few questions on social media. We sent out bios hashtags, and we can provide all of those in the follow-up email, our handles, and hashtags as well. And I think we welcome everyone to share as much information as possible on social media. So maybe I'll throw it back to Mike and Barbara to see if there's any last tips, but great questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Bio. Thank you, California Life Sciences Association. 2 Bio PSAs, everyone, before we offer our closing thoughts and send you on your way. First, if you have friends and colleagues who could not attend today, Bio will be sending out a blast email with a link so that they can access a replay, a recording of the entire session. And second, if you're using slides at Bio Digital, in order to prevent those awkward transitions between speakers and sessions, please plan on sharing those slides with your session organizer or moderator in advance, so they can condense everything into just one single presentation that the moderator will then seamlessly and efficiently control. Barbara?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to you for all of those great questions. Some closing thoughts. Just so much has changed in the past few weeks that have led us here, and it makes us all a little nostalgic for the past, and whether that was a few weeks ago, a few months ago, or many years ago. So we wanted to take our cue from the past and from Sesame Street and the letter.
This is not a mistake.
So our closing remarks are brought to you by the letter E, and E stands for environment. And what is clear now more than ever is that the lives and the lifestyle we once knew are only possible because of the invisible science that simply allows us all to be in the same room.
And E also stands for the word empathy, which against the current backdrop of COVID-19, we believe strongly is way more important than it was ever before. So, as all of you now go and begin to continue to put together your content for BioDigital, please keep that word top of mind. In my 2 decades in and around the life sciences, I've developed a deep passion for helping people like all of you communicate better about science, about technology, about medical ingenuity in a much more empathic way. As one of our clients, a gentleman named Hugh O'Dowd, that I suspect many of you might know, who was the CEO of Neon Therapeutics, just recently wrote last week in a note to his entire team upon the closing of the company's acquisition. And I'm quoting Hugh now. "We are in the aspiration business. We are in the aspiration business, and patients are waiting." Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Please, everyone, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a great biodigital meeting. So long.
Thank you.